Podcast, the show presented by the students of S.H.I.E.L.D., where we cover Batman No Man's Land in all its epic late 90s turn in the century glory. My name is Vincent, and joining me tonight,
I'm Mike.
And I'm Michael.
The usual crew. This episode we're calling, there's two main stories here, but they are connected. We have Two Down and Claim Jumping. We could call it both. I feel like Two Down sounds more interesting.
Two Down sounds better.
But they are connected. Interestingly, in DC's most recent collections of No Man's Land, they have the first thing that we're going to talk about, Batman Chronicles number 16, in No Man's Land Volume 1, right?
Yes, it's in the middle of the book, but for some reason you put it here when you mapped this all out.
And then the next stuff is the beginning of No Man's Land Volume 2, so we're into that.
Yeah, we've read the first two issues of No Man's Land Volume 2.
I didn't look up like contemporary, like a checklist if they even had or anything like that. But as far as I can tell, if you check like wikis or anything like that, most of them put Chronicles number 16 before it. They put the issues in this order. Chronicles number 16 before Claim Jumping.
I mean, thematically, it read well.
Yeah, for the purpose of the podcast in this episode, I think it fits perfectly. But it's all kind of, the placement of Chronicles is kind of arbitrary anyways, because like 2/3 of it is set during Road to No Man's Land, so definitely even before No Man's Land Volume 1.
Right.
So chronologically, it should be farther back. But this ultimately, I think this is the best way to do it. So, Batman Chronicles number 16. I'm going to cover this issue. There are three stories here. The main story, and I believe much longer than the others, is called Two Down. Written by Greg Rucka, art by Jason Pearson. As I said, set during the Road to No Man's Land chunk. And we talked about Rucka already. I think he already wrote a full arc, right? Did he write the Black Mask arc not too long ago? So he's already in the actual comic books, and we first saw him on a prose story related to Montoya. And Jason Pearson, we also talked about. He did something before, and I went into his history. I would say the art in this story is closer to what I know from Jason Pearson, and I think it does look a lot different. Not drastically, but it looks different from what we saw from him before. And personally, I like his style here. There's some fun stuff
for me. I don't particularly love this type of style, though.
Yeah, there's a bit of like cartoony flair, especially on Montoya. Though I'd say his Two-Face, which I'll get into in a second, his Two-Face is a little wonky in some instances, the way he depicts mostly his hair. But I really like his Montoya. So, story here is Montoya is overworked, even though this is still before No Man's Land proper. And so Gordon demands that she takes 2 down, which means 48 hours off. And so she decides to go home to check on her parents, who run a grocery store, who tell her that her brother, who she thought was out of the city, was actually on shore leave right before the earthquake hit. And he's been missing recently. So she immediately goes to try and track him down, and very quickly runs into him hanging out with Two-Face, who is actually helping people. But every time he flips the coin, and it's just like ridiculous luck that every single time it lands on the right side, so that he helps people and he doesn't like turn on people, and he does good. And so she kind of just starts like hanging with him, like they become essentially partners. It's not really clear like how much time she spends, because Gordon told her 48 hours, but like to me it seemed implied that she's like spending at least a week like hanging out with her brother and Two-Face and trying to rescue these people in this different area of the city.
Yeah.
And she actually ends up saving Harvey's life by shooting someone with a single bullet she had. and just shitty timing. Batman shows up right as that happens to attempt to punch out Two-Face and start a big fight. And she catches the coin in midair and basically begs Batman to hand him over. She's going to try and reform him. And she's like, I'm going to hold on to the coin for now. You don't need it. And the story ends with the caption, "Not the end," which as we get further into the next issues, we'll see with the time skip how that may have turned out, and maybe we'll get some gap filling there. But I really enjoyed this story. I would actually say overall, even though it's not full issue length, this was the highlight for me this episode. What did you guys
I would
think?
agree. This is definitely the strongest story in this bunch.
Yeah, probably.
What did you guys think of? Did you pick up on? And if you did, like, what do you think of the chemistry between Montoya and Harvey?
If this, I mean, knowing and reading what's come later, they have like this weird relationship, which we'll touch upon way later on the post part of this show. But where Montoya's saved Harvey, so Harvey kind of feels like he owes her one, and he kind of romantically likes that. But it's a very odd relationship, and we'll talk about it in like 50 episodes more down the line.
Yeah, I think there's actually even like there's like one panel where if you know some of the stuff down the line, you could definitely interpret pieces of this story knowing like with the context of that. Like you could almost see like a tiny spark from Harvey. Not necessarily from Montoya's side, though she obviously develops a certain level of respect for him in a way.
Right.
Any other thoughts on Two Down?
I thought it's a good setup. I mean, though, if we're talking stories that center around Montoya and Two-Face, there's one I like a lot better. But other than that, no, I don't have anything else to add. Talk about Joker's Funhouse.
Yep. So the next story in this anthology issue, written by Dennis O'Neil or by Chris Arnaud. Actually, wait, that's the wrong one. Written by Scott Beatty and art by Damian Scott. Yeah. There's a couple and they're stranded in Gotham. They tried to go rescue someone, but it turns out the person they were looking for had already left, and so now they're stuck. And they just stumble on, I guess, the Joker's home or just one of his prominent hideouts. And they keep just barely missing traps. And yeah, they're kind of exploring all these strange things that he has around, including a prop of possibly a real skeleton draped in a mock-up Jason Todd Robin costume, and also the original Scream painting, which is kind of ridiculous, especially given how this story ends, which I'll cut to the chase. This building explodes, and so the Scream painting in the DC universe is not legitimate, and the real one was burned in this random explosion. And this story is set, I believe this story is set during No Man's Land because Batgirl is there, etc. And yeah, and then Batgirl saves them from a booby trap, which would have been the final, like, literal ticking bomb to kill them. But it all is for nothing because as Batgirl swings away, the girlfriend, who they didn't even have a great relationship through the story, she pops open a can of soda and drinks some Joker venom. And that's how the story ends. It's another one where we've had one or two of these, and some of them have been in Chronicles, where the ending of this is just like a knife turn, like real bummer.
Yeah, I will say though, my favorite highlight kind of insertion on this was the laughing fish callback with the dead piranhas in the fish tank, so they're dead, so you can see them smiling.
Well, I wasn't sure about that. I guess that makes sense, but I thought that maybe some of them were dead, but maybe there was like one or two that were alive, because I thought it was similar to some of the other setups where it's like they just barely miss a trap which would have killed them. But either way, still swimming surrounded by dead piranhas is still pretty creepy.
Yeah, and then I mean the creepiest part in this though is the opening the door to like the dead hostages that just were never freed.
What about
horrifying?
what about the expired kielbasa?
The expired kielbasa, oddly enough, is the deadliest thing in the Joker's Funhouse.
Yeah, this was a great kind of story for an anthology.
Yes, yeah. I 22 pages of this would have been too much.
Yeah, it was great one-off look at the Joker, and the Joker does not appear on panel once.
Yeah, I think that was a strength to it.
Yeah, the closest that happens is there's a photo of him, and it seems like a fake mock-up childhood photo, because obviously that's not how he was as a child. So he staged that. Honestly, if you think too hard about that photo, that starts to get weird.
Yeah, I will say though, adding to it, the fact that he doesn't ever appear on panel, I think it makes him scarier that way. Like him not being there in this story, I thought was much better because it did add to a little bit of the horror. Like, so you don't know if he's going to show up or not, but knowing that you're alone in the Joker's funhouse of traps and anything you could step on could kill you is almost scarier than being tied up by the Joker and leaving left in a closet to die.
Yeah. Michael, any thoughts on this one?
Looking back at this and just remembering reading it and thinking about it a little more, I might like this better than the previous story, actually. It was definitely a good, contained little horror story, just in the middle of everything. Doesn't have a lot to do with No Man's Land, but that was a good premise and executed quite creepily. So,
yeah, I think both of these stories are strong, and I would say the third story, I wouldn't necessarily call it strong, but I think it works well in its way. And so overall, this issue, probably best Chronicles one we've read so far.
I'd say easily, if not the best, at least the most consistent across the board with the story.
Others have had more stories in them, so it kind of gets spread out and less even. So the third story here, Concluding Chronicles number 16, written by O'Neill, art by Chris Renaud. This is a story about Harold, and this is set at the Cataclysm during the earthquake. Harold, suddenly the Batcave starts falling apart, and it reminds him of his traumatic past with his mother. And then with everything destroyed, he's like, well, it kind of works out for me because I'm a little mentally deficient and I like fixing things. And so now I have a lot of shit to fix.
He's not mentally deficient. He just is mute.
That's not the way they write him. They write him like he has no idea what's going on. And Alfred like kind of triggers him. Essentially, Alfred's like, go away. And he goes away, and then he sees the results of the earthquake. And he's like, well, I got a lot of fixing to do. And just walks off. And
I'm wondering, is this his last appearance until he gets stupidly killed during Hush?
No, because this is Cataclysm. I think we've seen him chronologically since this.
Well, the last time we saw him was when he was using the machines to dig the holes in the Batcave to free the other members.
Which I think happens after this.
Okay. Yeah, I guess it would. Maybe.
I don't know that we've seen him since, but I guess we just have to assume that he's holding down the Batcave proper completely fell apart due to aftershocks, right?
Right. Yeah, it's gone.
So he must be at one of he must just be in the background at one or of the bases or following along with Alfred. But I don't think
I would assume so because Alfred and him were the ones that were staying back at the manor.
Yeah, but we haven't seen him in a little bit.
Yeah, and I know we're nearing the end of his appearances before he comes back and is revealed as the person that sold the secrets to Hush.
Yeah, I mean, maybe he just like quietly disappears during No Man's Land.
I think that's what it is. He just quietly disappears, and then he shows back up to get stupidly one-off killed in a bad, convoluted story.
But yeah, this story again, like I never like 100% understand the point of Harold and the characterization of Harold, but this little short was kind of wholesome in a weird way.
That's why I like Harold. he's got these weird, wholesome stories.
He's a lot like Lenny from Of Mice and Men, basically. That's what I mean. Like that's how I see Harold.
Yeah.
And so in this issue, you had the main story, which was like felt if it wasn't, it felt nearly like a full complete issue story, and it has some great characterization for Montoya and Two-Face, and is setting up developments and relationships down the line. And then you had the like interesting Joker spotlight without seeing the Joker, and then Twist of the Knife shock ending, and then you had this weird, slightly campy, wholesome Harold short. So this issue for me was really strong overall, and even beyond the Chronicle series, I think this is one of my highlights through the entire No Man's Land saga so far.
I wouldn't necessarily go that far, but this is probably one of the stronger issues you've read, and maybe like I think it's one I'll remember, but not maybe by the end of all this, one that I'll put up on a pedestal. And that end of it, but I did enjoy this very much.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. Okay, so next we move on to Legends of the Dark Knight 119. This one, it's written by Greg Rucka, penciled by Mike Deodato Jr. Is that how you pronounce that?
More or less.
Okay. Starting out, the cover I thought it's weird. I thought it was mostly really cool. It's by Brian Boland of Killing Joke fame. And it's Two-Face looking in a mirror, and it's like a Two-Face made up of Batman and Gordon, kind of. So it doesn't really make a lot of sense thematically with what's going on in the story or anything, I don't think, unless I'm missing something. But yeah, like that's the only thing is I don't know how much sense it makes. But then also, like, we only see the bad side of Two-Face's face, really, except a little glimpse of the good side in a mirror reflected in the mirror. And I'm not too crazy actually about the way the side of his face looks at this angle, and it's like the one thing about this cover that I don't love. It's not like Two-Face is supposed to be particularly visually appealing, but yeah, I guess it's messed up looking and whatever, and that's what Two-Face looks like. So, okay. This is the first part of a two-part story called Claim Jumping. We start out with Oracle narrating, and we see an updated version of the No Man's Land map, which I thought was kind of a cool status quo. The biggest difference from before being that now Batman has a big chunk of land, and a bunch of the other villains don't have land anymore. Some new ones do. And some of it's like in question, like there's like yellow writing over it with question marks next to their names because they're not quite sure who's running it. So yeah, I thought that was neat. And then we were talking before about how it's snowing in all the books consistently. So Barbara tells us that we're at the tail end of the worst winter in recent memory, not literally in terms of the temperature, but because nobody has heating or electricity, it's affecting them a lot worse than technically colder winters where they had heating. And we get in the book a bit of an example of this Batman Gordon split like Two-Face thing on the cover, where she's saying like we're all waiting for winter. Well, most of us do at any rate, and we get these two panels where it's like half Batman, half Gordon. They're both brooding, looking over their plans. So it's kind of we see a parallel between them. They're both kind of doing the same thing, trying to hold the city together, but not really working together as usual because Gordon's still mad at Batman for disappearing for no clear reason, as one would be. So then we see Two-Face is striking up a deal with the Penguin, and so I guess Two-Face's coin just finally landed on the bad side because he's not being helpful anymore. He's back to being a villain. I guess that was much earlier in the story, and we may have even seen Two-Face since then, chronologically. But yeah, so uh yeah, he's cutting a deal with Penguin, and he thinks he can. He's claiming he can deal with the Blue Boys and Batman. And there's this kind of splash panel of him saying, "I'll destroy him," talking about Gordon, and it's kind of a pretty striking, demented look at Two-Face. And then we see Oracle's communicating with the new Batgirl. She's not getting along with her because she's still upset that Batman has a new Batgirl without consulting her first. Or I mean, I don't know. She probably wouldn't be okay with it even if she was consulted. And she claims that she knows who she is, and I'm guessing she probably does, but she never says anything. I mean, she never says who it is. And then we see Batman talking to Oracle. He's still not. They're still kind of mad at each other about the new Batgirl thing, and yeah, Oracle tells him that there's some kind of Two-Face running some kind of trial by combat at City Hall. So Batman goes to investigate, and Oracle's like, "I think it's a trap," but he's already stormed off and doesn't hear her. So we see Gordon trying to strategize with his men. Once again, Foley's chewing him out, causing trouble for him. Except, like, I don't know that Foley's beef with Gordon here is necessarily consistent with his earlier characterization. Like, if I'm remembering right, isn't he the one who's super, like, trigger happy and whatever? But here he's like, oh, you're. Here he's like saying they should hold back and not go all in on this fight when they're outmanned. But so it kind of just seems like he's maybe just wants to disagree with Gordon any chance he gets. But I don't know. So Two-Face meets up with this uh, Russian woman. I guess she's a villain called Echo. She's got some kind of, they call it a Turing implant in her brain that was apparently part of some Russian experiment. She catches all these frequencies on it. It's like voices in her head, but also she uses it to read minds later on, not in this issue, but in the next one. So she's going to play into whatever Two-Face is doing. We see Gordon and Montoya having some kind of secret meeting behind Sarah's back. They can't tell Sarah about it. Later on, they say that they've sold their souls. This probably has to do with whoever the mysterious person Gordon was dealing with before is. I'm pretty sure it's Two-Face. We don't get real confirmation of that yet. Batman spying on the trial by combat. The person who the accused has to fight, they say, is the Rhino. Not the Marvel Rhino, obviously, and he's kind of just a big, strong guy. And yeah, they pit the Russian lady against him, Isabella Sharonova, and Batman breaks up the fight, and Two-Face, Penguin, and Gordon all alert their men, and this territory war starts, but Batman gets the Russian woman out of the way, thinking, she's in danger. She's much smaller and less imposing than the Rhino guy. but she catches him off guard and clobbers him on the head and knocks him unconscious. And then it's to be continued next issue. Okay, yeah, that summary might have gone on a little long, but yeah, the not really a lot to say since the story doesn't finish till next issue, and even then, there's some loose ends we haven't quite dealt with yet. But yeah, I'd say these issues were fine. Not particularly stand out, but not bad by any means. I like the way this guy drew Batman mostly. Like there were some close-ups in particular that I thought were really good. Some of the wide shots, it becomes apparent how crazy long his ears are. But it's just a stylistic thing that could be cool.
Yeah, I would say I think Diodato's art here is pretty good. It's kind of a version of Diodato that I'm not as familiar with. It's far away from his mid '90s like work, which screamed '90s on Wonder Woman, Artemis, and Glory, and then obviously it's far off from what he'd be known in the 2000s and today, where he was doing a lot of Marvel work with Bendis on things like Dark Avengers and other books, and today on Berserker. I think he's kind of a very solid guy here. There's one funny panel where Batman is like balancing on two like radio towers.
Oh yeah, that was weird.
I thought that was funny. And then there are two other kind of status quo world building things that I want to note from this issue. We start here where we've now reached day 127. And in fact, through this arc, I think we get up to like 129 or 130. So they're deep into no man's land. And also during the winter, the river does freeze over, but it's not a reliable exit route because the mines are still active, which I feel like if they really tried, there could be some way to circumvent that. Like you get on the ice and then you throw or push something in front of the mine and then just repeatedly do that. But I guess that defeats the point of the river being frozen, since the mines exploding would destroy that. But I feel like the river being frozen, it would be a good opportunity to try and get rid of a lot of the mines. But I don't know if it's even necessarily worth it. That would probably be a pain in the ass.
It would, that would be a huge undertaking. So it's just better just not to touch it. If you were thinking of that situation, I thought Greca's doing a very good job of showing Gordon kind of losing control and kind of going into this descent down a dark-sided path of what he wants to do is he wants to try to keep having order where there is none. But as we keep going down, you can almost look in like Gordon's kind of becoming a villain himself right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, even they kind of tease that with Batman to an extent as well, where when he took over from whoever it was,
Scarface.
Yeah, I guess Scarface, and he had to basically institute a hierarchy and tribute system and everything like that. So it's just showing the transformation or dissolution of morality or traditional forms of morality in this status quo.
Right. And I think it's done in a very good way. Diodato is one of my favorite artists. I love his work on during JMS's era on Spider-Man, and really big fan of Dark Avengers. So it's fun to go back and see this kind of era for him. I know I've looked through his work on Wonder Woman in the 90s. I don't hate it, but I prefer like this more style. Definitely a guy who's grown more and more. He's a lot more digital now. What's the Berserker Unbound's the book he's doing with Jeff Lemire right now? I think the backgrounds in that book look gorgeous, and it's still pretty high caliber stuff from him. So it's very welcoming to see Mike Deodato drawing Batman, because I think he draws a damn fine Batman. though I would say that his art is. It reminded me a lot of John Bogdanov's work in the issue we read with Superman in this, but I think that comes down to the coloring, and it's very kind of standard house colors style from DC at this time. It looks like kind of evergreen, I would say, if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
I like this a lot. If we don't have anything else to say, I can take us into Shadow of the Bat 87 and wrap us home.
The only final thing is that mostly from the map on the first page, but then one or two bits of dialogue, we're getting very slight teases of other villains and what may be coming up in other arcs. And
Right.
one of them is Poison Ivy, which I believe is relatively soon. And so actually, as we move into the next issue, I'm going to double check our reading order. So go ahead.
Yeah. Batman Shadow of the Bat 87, same creative team. This Brian Boland cover is a split vertically, with the left half being Batman jumping into action and the right side being Gordon kind of under siege. While the leaders are of both of these gangs, like we got one in like gimp gear, and the other one in like kind of loose army fatigues. I think the other cover is a lot better. This one is, it's whatever. I do want to note that it is kind of weird that we're getting Brian Boland doing these covers, because Brian Boland would then go on to be the cover artist for Batman Gotham Knights, which we're nearing the end of Shadow of the Bat. Like I think the last issue of Shadow of the Bat is like 94, and I think it's after No Man's Land that Gotham Knights will start up. So just kind of a weird thing to tack on for my headcanon knowledge of like, oh, Boland did covers for this and then would later do a book covers for like the fourth regulated Batman book again.
And in fact, I'm not sure if we already saw this, but this may be because I think Brian Stelfreeze was the ongoing cover artist on Shadow of the Bat. And it may have happened before this, but this issue may be the one that breaks his streak.
Okay. But yeah, just a fun little piece of knowledge there. Claim Jumping Part 2, opening up in Oracle's clock tower as she's getting all of these kind of frantic calls from her one spy that's still out in the action. We get the Oracle caption boxes basically recapping what's happening. Two-Face and his men are taking over the territory from Penguin, while the Blue Boys are getting kind of hit and overrun. Batgirl's and Batman's territory trying to hold down the fort, but she's only one person, and it's a numbers game at this point. Essen gets hit by a bullet, so Gordon's freaking out, trying to think if she's still alive. And the spy that Oracle has out in the field is then taken hostage in Batman's territory. We cut to Batman up on a rooftop with Echo as he's getting injected with sleep serum. He does eventually wake up, and Echo basically just expounds on Batman's origins again. She's like, because with her telepathy powers, she was able to read his mind, and basically just reveals that her job was to keep Batman here so he wasn't able to interfere in the fight. Penguin kind of corners Batman's territory with Batgirl as they approach the standoff with the hostage. A firefight does break out, though, and as Two-Face's men are running in, where Two-Face comes out to Oswald and is like, no, I double-crossed you the whole time. I took a deal. So while you were running over here, the Blue Boys and my guys were also overrunning your territory. You just lost half. And the Penguin got hit in the thigh with an arrow. So he's just sitting there bleeding out as Two-Face is gloating, which I thought was a pretty good moment. And it was all a timed game, which is why Echo had Batman trapped. All to give Two-Face enough time to take over the territory. Back at the Oracle's clock tower in the infirmary, Montoya and Oracle patch up Essen, and the bullet only grazed her, so she's going to be fine. But Montoya and Gordon have this moment where wondering if they did what was right. Which is it? is it Bach or I think it's Mackenzie. I can't remember which cop it is. Runs and comes to Gordon to asking if the price of his ego is enough because they lost 11 men today. But Gordon just like cold clocks him, which is kind of a huge moment because we haven't seen Gordon strike one of his men yet. So it's further deepening his kind of descent here. Batman gets freed by Echo to find that in his territory, people have been killed and like basically posted up on one of the walls in Batman's territory, like maimed and murdered to look like kind of no trespassers. They're all shot with arrows and put on display with the bat symbol tagged over with two faces with tails you lose. So I think the good guys pretty much lose this one. A pretty big blow to the Blue Boys and Batman at the end of this. As Two-Face cements himself more and more as a bigger force in No Man's Land going forward. There was a couple moments where I thought the ears and the proportions on Batman by Deodato in this issue were a little inconsistent, but otherwise, I still enjoy Deodato on this issue, and I still think really good writing by Rucka here. I'll open it up to you guys' thoughts, but I enjoyed this issue and arc pretty good.
Yeah, I think I wonder how much was planned out. I don't know if the Sarah Essen bullet grazing is kind of foreshadowing really far out. I'm not sure about that.
For what's to come.
And the gratuitous double page splash of Batman's origin, it's a nice page, but it is gratuitous. And then the page where Batman escapes from his binds is actually, I thought, actually conveyed pretty cool in a pretty cool way and very effective, like storytelling. Yeah, I thought this was the weaker of the two issues. It felt like less happened. I don't really have any in Echo / Isabella, the Russian chick's role yet because it's not remotely clear. She was supposed to be working for Two-Face, but clearly doesn't give a fuck about that. And we don't know about any other motivation. So she took up a bunch. She and Batman were a bunch of the pages in this issue, and Batman ultimately didn't affect anything in this like overall main plot for these two issues, and her role and motivations are completely unknown so far. And then also obviously they're still teasing out this secret contact that Gordon has now dumped onto Montoya, and we're pretty certain we know what it is, especially since we read this arc directly following something else. But it's not clear. It's not really clear to us. It's not revealed yet. And so this issue, when it and also there's like the final page is like, hey, look, Two-Face is really brutal, and Batman's probably gonna have to deal with him some more. So the end of this issue, it's like 3 things that are not remotely resolved, and I don't know. I felt kind of unfulfilled by the end of this arc.
But I think you're supposed to. It's if we were to isolate just looking at this book, we have a long way to go, and I think this is a good way to start it because there's going to be more story arcs in here, and not everything is going to get concluded in 2 issues. But we'll see if they come back to it. And also, like, it is kind of a big Batman line-wide event. So for me, I'm fine with, like, this is basically kind of just repositioning the chess pieces here. Like, lining up, all right, who's going to be big now? We'll set up on the back end some guys that are going to come in later. But, all right, Two-Face is the big bad now, while we started with it being kind of Black Mask and Scarface and Penguin. So we realigned the board here, which is what I like, because I think it was getting a little stale near the end of No Man's Land Volume 1.
Sure.
But I would say one of my favorite parts in this is that when Oracle was talking to Batgirl back in Legends of Dark Knight, she knows who it is. She knows who Batgirl is, and we should be dealing with that in the next story arc.
Sort of.
Sort of.
All right. Any final thoughts before we wrap it for the night?
Not really. I think this was a solid installment. Yeah, probably one of the better chunks of issues.
All right. That's 2 down and claim jumping, all from Greg Rucka, all having to do with Two-Face. I'm very excited to see when Two-Face pops back up again. And Montoya is like low-key my favorite character in No Man's Land.
All right.
So tune in next time, and next time is an interesting episode. It might be a shorter one, to TBD. It's the Young Justice special.
Oh, that's right.
As well as Batman Chronicles 17, which includes a Man-Bat family story, essentially.
With the Man-Bat kid?
Yes, a Oracle story and a Killer Croc story. So that should be possibly a mixed bag, but definitely a lot to talk about. And tune in for that one. Thanks for watching this one. Go watch the previous ones. Have a good night, or whenever you're watching this.